Hello and welcome to this short guide on how to use World of Logs to optimize your DPS. Okay, so here we have the World of Logs dashboard screen for a report linked to us by our raid leader after the event. This is an Ice Crown Citadel 25 run. Now the dashboard's very good for a general overview of, what happened, who you killed and so on, but we want some more detail, and since we're DPS we're looking at the damage done view. Now for this guide I'm going to be looking at a Deathbringer Sourfang kill. It was actually the speed kill, so to speak, the achievement I've got made a mess. So here on this screen you can see basically what you'd see from Recount with some slightly nicer graphics, which is all well and good, but we want to get some more detail. Now World of Logs is incredibly useful for getting some good stats out. So let's have a look at, there you can see me just sorting on the various stats. But let's drill down and have a look at one specific DPS. We'll start with the top DPS, that's me. That's only because I'm an assassination rogue, it's got nothing else to do with it. It's just an encounter that's set up for me. Now, when you're analysing DPS, the buffs gain view is very, very useful. Now, looking at this, we can see that I've done my main job, which is to keep Slice and Dice and Hunger for Blood up for the whole fight without letting them drop. I mean, that's just the first thing that you need to be able to do as an assassination rogue. The other thing I've done is manage to have a pretty good Envenom uptime. So that explains consistency in DPS. But if you look at the beginning, you'll notice a large peak, and that's caused by doing heroism at the beginning. As a raid group, we don't tend to use it during the frenzy, we do it right at the beginning. Now, during that heroism, I dropped a potion of speed, which accounts for that speed buff. I also kept overkill up, so I had it at the start because of being in stealth at the start, and then I vanished during heroism to get an extra buff from that, which is a nice little tip for any rogues watching. I was also somewhat lucky with my procs from Berserker and my Pyrice Infuser. They all sort of stacked up at the same time. I also dropped a Thistle Tea, but you can't see that because there's no corresponding buff. But that would explain why I've got a pretty large peak during heroism. I had some luck later on in the fight, which explains later peaks. But that's my DPS there. So nothing really particularly interesting. I've done my job. Let's do a comparison between two Death Knights. This is Theris, who was second on DPS. As you can see, his sustained buffs, the ones he's meant to keep up for the majority of the fight, he's done pretty well at keeping them up. But as I said, heroism is a very interesting time to look at, because depending on the class, there are things you would be expecting people to be doing at that time to optimize the DPS. So like me, Theris has dropped a potion of speed during heroism. He's also used Icy Rage. He's had a bit of luck with his Risen Fury proc. Unholy Might was used during heroism. And that, I believe, is pretty much it, but because he's stacked them up, he has got a peak at that point. He's done pretty well. But Theris' story is one of consistency throughout the fight. Raven is the other Death Knight in the raid, also did very well on DPS, but not quite as well as Theris, so let's have a look at why that might be. Desolation, he didn't keep that up quite as well, but Unholy Force he did a much better job on. Unholy Strength, though, there's a big gap. And you can see on the graphs that corresponds to a little dip in his DPS, so that explains some of it. But let's have a look during heroism. So that's the heroism buff there. Risen Fury procced, which is nice. Rage, he probably should have done at the same time as Risen Fury was proccing. I don't know if his UI will show that, but that would have stacked up and it would have been nice for him. We also had Unholy Might, but I think I may have forgotten to click that when I was recording the video here. Let's see. Yep, I did. So, Unholy Might he did during heroism, but it wasn't stacked up with all the other buffs in the same way that Theris managed to do pretty well. And that accounts for some of the difference between the two on that fight, which I'm just trying to get back to the sort of overview page. You see that Raven, although his DPS was very, very respectable indeed, he didn't quite do as much as Theris, which is especially impressive in Theris' case, because if you look at the gear scores here, which of course are only a guide, and maybe they were captured when one of them was in tank gear, so you can't account for it too much, but Theris seems to be punching above his weight, so to speak. So, another comparison. Let's have a look at our top mage, Fujia. This one takes a little while to load. Now Fujia did pretty well on the DPS, especially considering he, unlike the melee, had other jobs to do in this fight, which corresponds with the little dips in his DPS there. But let's have a look at this. Focus magic he's kept up very well. There's one point where he was obviously doing something else where it dropped. Now during heroism, again this is taking a little while to show up. It's all done via Ajax, and I think my connection was dropping out at the time. But we'll see how we go. They will show up eventually. Yes, so you can see that Fujia has put a lot of his buffs on around the heroism time. He's actually dropped a couple of them slightly early, which I'm not sure on the reasons for that. Maybe it's a mana efficiency thing, but it means that he doesn't have a very high peak during heroism. He does, you know, try to stack up those buffs, but he's not stacking them all at the same time, as we saw with Morthax and Raven. Now, if we look at the other mage, Hybrid, who also did very well, but less DPS than Fujia, let's have a look at what was going on with Hybrid during heroism. So Icy Veins was cast, and volatility there. And you can see all of these buffs were happening at the same time. Which you'll imagine some of this is luck and some of this is using the cooldowns effectively, which means that Hybrid has a very large peak, which hopefully, yep, there we can see, almost very close to 15k DPS during heroism there. Now, Hybrid was also doing other things, but what's quite interesting is Hybrid, unlike Fujia, evocated twice during the fight. Those correspond with troughs in the DPS. So we can see that Hybrid was having mana problems that Fujia just wasn't. The other troughs were probably caused by Blood Beast or some other circumstances in the fight that melee don't have to worry about. But these evocations are really what's, I think, made a lot of difference between Hybrid and Fujia, if you ignore pure gear. And you can see, when we look at the overview, a big gap between them. So I would be getting the two, sitting down together and talking about how to make the most of their cooldowns during heroism, while not going Well, that's it for this short guide. I hope that was useful.